The notice came sealed with a great black disc of ducal wax the size of a crown piece, and Marian Sterne had read the whole of it through twice by the one candle before she let herself understand that it was the end of them. It lay on the shop counter among the small bright tools of her father's trade, the tweezers, the eyeglass, the little brass keys ranked by size on their green bays. A folded sheet of law paper come from a solicitor in the north on behalf of the Duke of Blackfell, into whose hands the whole of the Sterne family's debt had lately passed, and it said, under all its long civil words, one short thing, that the debt was called in entire, and that if it were not answered within the month, the shop and the house and the very tools on the counter would be sold up, and Mr. Crispin Sterne would answer for the remainder in a debtor's gaol. Marian was 24 and had kept the accounts of that shop since she was 17, and knew to a farthing that there was no answering it, and she stood a long while with her ink-stained thumb on the black seal, listening to the one clock in the room her father had made, ticking on in the dark as though nothing in the world had changed. She had known for a week that it would come to her, for there was no one else it could come to. Her mother was a faded, frightened woman who had spent the fortnight weeping into her workbox and saying something would surely turn up, as it never yet had. Her sister Emmeline was but 19, honest, with a good young man half promised to her and no notion of business, which Marian meant to keep so, and her brother Crispin, handsome, charming, 25 Crispin, the golden one, their father's darling and the family's whole hope, was the reason the paper had come, and was not, at the moment it came, answerable to say where he had been. So it fell, as everything fell in that family, to the plain one, the quiet one, who did the fine work and kept the books and was thanked for neither. For that was the truth of the Sterne workshop, and only Marian and her father had quite known it, that the celebrated clocks which went out under the name of Josiah Sterne, and lately Sterne and Son, were not, and had not for some years been, made by any man at all. Old Josiah had taught his younger daughter at the bench, because she had the hands for it and the boy had not, and Marian had sat at his elbow from the age of 6 and learned the whole of the mystery, until in his failing years it was her hands behind every fine movement that left the shop, and her eye that found the fault no one else could find, and her name on nothing whatsoever. A woman could not be a clockmaker. The trade would not have it, and the customers would not have it, so the work went out under her father's name while he lived and her brother's after he died, and Marian kept the secret as she kept the books, because the family lived on it, and because she had learned young that the surest way to be left in peace was to be reckoned of no account. She put the notice in her apron, and pinched out the candle, and went up to bed and did not weep. She had found long ago that weeping mended nothing and woke everyone. Instead, she lay in the dark and did what she was made to do, which was to take the ruin apart, the way she would take apart a stopped movement, wheel by wheel, to find the one caught tooth that had halted the whole. And when she had turned it every way there was, she came, a little before the light, to the single hard bright fact at the center of the wreck, that there was one thing in the world that would answer the debt entire and save the shop and her mother and Emmeline's good name and Crispin's neck, and that it was not money, for they had none, but herself. For the county had a story about the Duke of Blackfell, and Marian had heard it all her life. He had been a warm, laughing young lord once, they said, the heir to the great bleak house on the high moor, as good as promised to the most beautiful girl in 3 counties. And then, 12 winters ago, there had been a fire at Blackfell in the depth of a February night, and the young lord had been terribly marked in it. And the beautiful girl had looked once at what the fire had made of him, and could not love it, and had gone away and married better. And he had shut the house, and stopped every clock in it, and never since been seen beyond his own park. The silent Duke, they called him now. The man who stopped the clocks, and the bolder sort called him the Beast of Blackfell. and it was known that he had lately taken to buying up the debts of ruined families through his man of business, though no one could say why a man who wanted nothing and saw no one should trouble to do such a thing. And that was how the whole of the Sterne debt had come, in one quiet transfer, into the hands of the most feared man in the North. Marian rose with the light, dressed in her plainest gray, told her mother she was going to see a gentleman about the debt, and did not say which, and she took the mail as far as the last market town, and then hired a gig she could not afford to carry her the last cold miles up onto the moor, where the road climbed between walls of black stone under a wide pale sky, and at last, at the head of a long bare valley, the great house of Blackfell stood up out of the fell like something the moor had decided to keep. It was a vast, gray, shut-faced house, its long rows of windows dark, no smoke but from 2 chimneys out of 40, no dog, no sound, and above the huge front door rose a square clock tower with a great pale dial in it, and the hands of that dial. Marian saw as the gig came up the drive, stood at 4:20 past 2, and had the fixed, patient, wrong look of hands that had stood so a very long time. She looked at the stopped clock a moment, this maker's daughter come to the house of the man who stopped the clocks, and then she got down, stiff and cold and steady, and knocked on the monster's door. An old butler opened it, a stooped, gray, gentle man who looked at her plain gown and her hired gig, with a courtesy that had no hope in it. "The house sees no one, madam," he said, before she had spoken, and Marian, who had come a great way to be turned from a door, said, "I am aware of it, and I am sorry to trouble a house that wishes to be left alone. But I am not here to see the house. I am Miss Sterne, and I am the debt his grace called in a week ago, or near enough as makes no difference. My brother owes what cannot be paid, and I have come to say so to his grace's face, and to offer the only thing that can be offered instead. You may tell him it is the party being ruined, come to spare his lawyer the postage. I will wait on the step, I do not mind the cold." She waited a long while in the wind, and had begun to think she would be left there till the light went, when the old butler came back with a changed face, and said his grace would see her, and she was taken, not into any bright receiving room, for there were none lit, but down a long stone passage hung with the ghosts of pictures under Holland, past clock after clock, standing against the walls. A tall case clock, a bracket clock, a lantern clock in a niche, every single one of them stopped at that same wrong minute, 4:20 past 2, so that the whole silent house seemed to hold one single breath it had held for 12 years, and brought at last to a plain door at the far cold end, and shone in, and left. It was a working room, not a stateroom, a long, low, book-lined study with one good fire, a great desk, and on every shelf and sill, more clocks, all stopped, and standing at the desk with his back half to the door, and his marked side turned from the window, was the Duke of Blackfell. He was a tall man, broad through the shoulder, dark, perhaps 35, and along the left side of his jaw, and up toward the temple, ran an old scar, long-healed, not the raw horror of the fireside tales, but a pale taut seam in a grave and handsome face, the kind of mark one saw, and then, a moment later, half stopped seeing. He did not turn to show it. "You have come a long, cold way, Miss Sterne," he said, in a low, rough voice like a wheel going slow over gravel, "to say to my face a thing you might have written. I will hear it, since you have come, but I warn you I am a poor audience for pleading, having had much practice at hearing it, and none at all at giving way." "Then we shall suit," said Marian, "for I have not come to plead, having no talent for it. I have come to make you an offer of business, which I think you will find a better bargain than the one your lawyer has got. And I would be obliged if you would turn round while I make it, for I have found that a thing said to a man's shoulder is never quite believed, and I mean to be believed." There was a silence. And then the Duke of Blackfell turned round, slowly, and set the marked side of his grave, dark face full to the light and full to her with the braced, flat stillness of a man who had done this before and watched a face change, and Marian, who had been raised on the tail of the beast, and had come the whole cold way half expecting a monster, looked at the long, pale, healed seam along his jaw, and the dark, steady, wary eyes above it, and did the one thing no one in 12 years had done at that turning. She did not look away, and did not look pained, and did not, by so much as a flicker, pretend the scar was not there. She looked at him plainly, as she would at any man she had come to do business with, and went on with what she had come to say. There, now you have shown me your face, and I have seen it, and we need neither of us think about it again, which will save us both a great deal of time. Here is my offer. My brother's debt cannot be paid, there is not the money, there never will be, and you know it, which is why the paper threatened gaol, and not distraint. Gaol will get you nothing but the keeping of my brother. So I offer you the only thing in that ruined house worth your having, and it is not money, and it is not the shop. It is me. I am 24, sound, plain, and I keep house and books better than any steward you employ. I ask for no love, and no notice, and no place at your table you do not wish to give. And if you will discharge the whole of the debt, and take the Sterne name into your protection, I will marry you, and keep your house, and trouble your solitude no more than the furniture. A wife who came to you knowing exactly what she came for, and asking nothing back, is the most let alone a man in your position is ever likely to be. You have a monster's name, and I have a ruined one, and I think we might do each other some good. The Duke looked at her a long moment, and something moved far back in the grave dark face that she had no name for then, though the name would come to her later, and it would be astonishment. You are either the coldest woman I have ever met, he said at last, or you are pretending to be, at very great cost to yourself, because you have 3 people at home who will starve if you are not, and I do not think you are cold at all. Sit down, Miss Sterne. You are shaking, though you would die before you owned it, and there is no sense conducting a bargain over a woman about to fall down. Then, if you still wish it, we will talk about your terms, for a woman who offers a bargain and names no terms for herself has either given up entirely or is a great deal cleverer than she is letting on, and I begin to suspect the second. I have terms, said Marian, sitting, because in truth the room had begun to swim. I have 3. I did not name them, because a woman who leads with her terms is thought grasping, and one who leads with her sacrifice is thought a fool, and I would rather be neither with you until I know which you despise less. Name them, said the Duke of Blackfell, and there was something in the roughness of it that was almost, against its own will, alive. The first is for my sister. Emmeline is 19 and honest, and has a good young man who will have her if her name is clean, and drop her the day it is not. So her marriage portion is to be settled on her the day I sign, to her own separate use out of the reach of my brother and any creditor of his, living or to come. She is not to be ruined by this the way I am. I will spend myself, but I will not spend her. The second is for my mother. She is not strong, and she is frightened, and she has done nothing in her life but be gently useless, which is not a hanging fault. She is to have a small, sure income and a quiet, warm place to end her days, and she is never to be told the whole of what her son did, for it would break what is left of her, and I have carried it well enough alone. And the third, said Marian, and her voice changed a little and steadied. The third is for me, and it is the only thing in this bargain I want for myself. My father was Josiah Sterne. You will have heard the name. You are a man who buys clocks, or your house is, for I never in my life saw so many in one place, though I never in my life saw so many stopped. He was the finest maker in the north, and he died 3 years ago, believing his life's work come to nothing. with his last and greatest clock unfinished on the bench. A regulator, meant to keep truer time than anything in England, that I have never had the heart to sell. It is to be seized within the month and broken up for the brass. That is my third term. Before I sign a word, my father's unfinished clock and the whole of his tools are to be bought in from the bailiffs, entire, unbroken, and brought here with me. Keep your title and your gold, I ask for neither. I will have my father's clock and finish it myself, though it take me the rest of my life, and no one else's hand shall touch it. The Duke of Blackfell had gone very still. You will finish it yourself, he said. It was not a question, it was too large. I will. I made half of it, though the labels say otherwise, and I am the only person living who knows how my father meant to end it. Marian lifted her chin. Most men think a woman who says such a thing is either mad or lying, and I have long since stopped minding which they choose. But you ask my terms, and that is the one I care for, and I will not sign without it. For a moment, the man by the window did not move. And then he crossed the room and stood over the great desk, and looked down at a small object that lay upon it beside the ink. Marian had taken it for a paperweight, and she saw now that it was a gold pocket watch, open-faced, and its hands, like every other pair in that house, stood at 24 past 2. He touched it once, lightly, the way another man might touch a wound to see if it still ached, and then looked up at her, and said, in a different voice, in a dozen years, Miss Sterne, no one has come into this house and asked me for anything at all, because the whole world believes there is nothing here that any sane person could want. And you have come up my drive with your whole life gone to smash behind you, and asked me for a broken clock. I will grant your 3 terms, gladly, and trouble my lawyer with none of it. And see your father's clock brought here whole, before the bailiffs sharpen a chisel, and it is the first time in a very long while that I have wished to know what to make of anything. Go home, settle your mother and your sister, and come back when your affairs are wound up, and we will be married as quietly as 2 people were ever married. It is a bargain, Miss Sterne. God help us both. They were married 3 weeks later, in the cold little church at Gilthorpe below the moor, before almost nobody, the old butler Beale, the housekeeper, and a frail weeping parson named Mr. Yeddon, who had christened the Duke and plainly meant to keep up the family habit of grieving over him, and Marian wore her grey silk and no veil, and did not once, before the whole small company, look away from her husband's face. She had resolved, on the cold miles home, on the one thing she had to give him, which was honesty, for she would not begin even a bargain in a lie, and whatever the county said of him, he had granted a ruined stranger a father's clock on the strength of one sentence. And when the Duke bent to sign the register, she saw that he wrote his name, Gabriel, with the bare left hand, the right, the marked one. He kept a little back, closed loosely about something in his coat she could not see, but had already guessed, for she had seen where his hand went, at the church door and again at the altar, the small unconscious movement of a man reassuring himself of a thing over his heart, and she knew, before ever she was told, that he carried the 12th pair of stopped hands in the house upon his own body, and had done for 12 years. Blackfell, in the days that followed, was the strangest house she had ever kept, and the quietest. It was not, she came to see, a neglected house, but a mourning one, the used rooms kept with a still, exact, sorrowful care, the fires laid and screened, the linen aired, as though a devoted household were keeping everything in readiness for a life that had gone away and might, if all were kept just so, one day come back. and through the whole of it ran the stopped clocks, dozens of them, every one halted at that same wrong minute, and Marian, who had grown up in a house where a dozen clocks struck the hours in a soft, ragged chorus she had loved since the cradle, found the silence of all those stilled movements the hardest thing in the place to bear, harder than the cold. Harder than the marked shy man at the far end of it, who came to dinner only sometimes and spoke, when he spoke, of nothing at all. But it was not only silence she found. On her first morning, waking in a warm, bright south room she had not expected, for she had looked to be housed like the furniture, and instead the fire had been lit and screened before she woke, and her father's tools, come up whole from the sale, laid out on a good bench in their proper order she saw, on the table by the bed, squared exactly to the edge, a single thing that stopped her breath. It was a clock, a small, plain, walnut-cased bracket clock, no bigger than a workbox, and it was going. It was the one clock in that whole stopped house that was alive, its quiet tick filling the room like a heartbeat. And Marian knew it before she had crossed the floor to it, because she had watched her father make it when she was 12 years old, and it had stood on their own mantel until the year the money began to go and it had been the first fine thing sold. She had thought never to see it again. It stood now, wound and set to true time, ticking on her table in the house of the man who stopped the clocks. And she sat down on the edge of the bed with her hand over her mouth, and did not understand one word of what she saw. She asked the housekeeper about it, a spare, upright, gray-faced woman of 60, named Mrs. Pruitt, with a ring of keys at her waist and a face long out of the habit of showing anything. "The clock, madam," said Mrs. Pruitt, "was got back by his Grace's order, along with your father's other things. He was particular it should be found and wound and set going in your room before you came." And when Marian, hardly trusting her voice, asked why, in a house where he had stopped every clock in the world, he should trouble to start this one, the housekeeper's composed face unbent by the width of a single sentence. "I couldn't say what was in his Grace's mind, for he doesn't tell it me. But I've kept this house 12 years, and I'll say this, having said too much already, that man has not let a clock run under this roof since the night of the fire, not one. And the first thing he did when he knew you were coming was send 20 miles for one of yours, and wind it with his own hands. I don't know what it means, madam, but I know it means something, for I've never once seen him do the like." And she gathered her keys and went out, and left the new Duchess on the edge of the bed in the winter light, listening to her father's clock keep time in a house of stopped ones, listening to her own heart, which she had told to behave itself, and which now would not. She found the great clock on the 4th day. She had been let by then to go where she pleased in the house, all but 2 places, which she would learn of soon enough, and in the great hall. In the cold gray heart of the house under the tower, she came at last upon the largest clock at Blackfell, and stood before it a long time. It was a magnificent thing, a long case regulator near 12 feet high, dark mahogany and gilt and glass, plainly the finest clock in the house, standing against the paneling, with its long pendulum hanging still, and its silver dial stopped, like all the rest, at 24 minutes past 2. And something in the line of the case, the sober grace of it, the way the hood was made, spoke to her so exactly in the private grammar of a trade she had learned before she could read, that her hands were opening the door of the case before her mind had told them to, and she reached up into the dim brass innards of the movement, feeling for the back plate the way she would feel for a face in the dark, and turned her father's little folding glass to the one gray shaft of light. And there, engraved deep in the brass in a copperplate she would have known blindfold at the bottom of the sea, was a name, and the name was Josiah Sterne, and under it the word Fessett, and under that a year that was older than she was. She was still standing so, her arm up inside the great clock and the tears running down without her leave, when the Duke of Blackfell came into the hall behind her and stopped. She had not heard him. She heard him now, the small check in his step, the intake of breath, and she took her arm carefully out of the movement and turned, not troubling to hide her wet face. "This clock," she said, and her voice was not quite her own. "This is my father's clock. His hand is inside it. Josiah Sterne made this." "Yes," said the Duke of Blackfell. He stood in the middle of the cold hall with the gray light on the marked side of his face, and did not come nearer, and did not turn away. "He made it for my grandfather, before I was born, the finest clock in the north. Everyone said so. The whole valley set its time by the Blackfell clock for 40 years. My father loved it above every other thing in this house. When I was a boy, it kept the hours of my whole life. I did my lessons by it, and heard it strike me up to bed 1,000 nights, and thought, the way a boy does, that it was the very voice of time itself, and would go on forever." He stopped. He had seen her face, and where her hand still rested on the old dark case. "I did not know," he said, more quietly. "When my lawyer told me the name of the family whose debt had come to me, Sterne, I did not, God forgive me, so much as think of the clock. It was only when you stood in my study and said your father's name aloud that I understood whose daughter you were, and whose hand it was I had lived under the whole of my life, and even then it seemed too strange a thing to say to a woman I had that hour agreed to marry, that the one clock I have loved longest in the world was made by your father, and that I have kept it, stopped, in the place of honor in my house, for 12 years. Marian looked from the great stopped clock to the grave-marked man, and back, and something in her that had been braced since the notice came, braced her whole life, if she were honest, went quietly loose, the way a wheel comes free when at last you find the caught tooth. "Then we have neither of us been quite so alone in this as we thought," she said. "His clock, kept honored at both ends of the shire by two people who never knew the other was doing it. My father died believing his work come to nothing, and the finest thing his hands ever made has stood in the place of honor in a duke's house every day of the 12 years I have been grieving him. I am glad I know it." And the Duke of Blackfell, who knew no more what to do with a weeping woman than with a wife who looked him in the face, came a little nearer, not touching, and said the truest thing either of them had yet said in that marriage. "I am glad you came, Marian. I did not think I should ever be glad of anything again. I find I am glad of you." And then, as though the saying of it had cost him more than he could afford, he bowed, and went away to the far end of the house, and left her alone with her father's clock. But he had said it, and they had both heard him, and the house was not, after that, quite so silent as it had been. She learned the man through the house, and the house through its clocks, and it was old Haskett who taught her most of the rest. Haskett was the oldest servant at Blackfell, a bent, brown, slow-spoken man of near 70, who had been the clock winder there 50 years, going round with his ring of keys, day upon day, winding and setting, so the whole house told one time, and though there had been nothing to win for 12 years, he had never been turned off, but kept about the place, his winding keys still on his belt, worn bright with a lifetime's handling. He took to appearing wherever she was, with some errand to excuse him, and letting fall sidelong the parts of her husband's history the county's tale left out, for he had loved the boy Gabriel had been, and had waited, Marian came to think, a long time for someone he might tell. That his Grace had been a warm, open, laughing boy, Haskett told her, the best-loved young master the house had known. For he had been kind to the servants, in a house where kindness ran short. That there had been a young lady, before here old Haskett grew careful, the beauty of the county, a Miss Rosamond, as good as promised to the young lord while he was whole and merry, who found she could not care for him after the fire, and married a baronet, and was my Lady Ashworth now, and never came near the moor. But it was not the fire that had done the worst of it. Haskett said, low, turning a seed box that wanted no turning, and not the ladies going either. It was the thing underneath both, whatever had made a young man who had every reason to live come home from that fire, and when his father died of the shock that same spring, and the title fell on him. Go round this house with his own hands, and stop every clock at the minute the fire began, and forbid that any be started while he lived. A body would have to be told that by his grace himself, madam, or never know it at all. I've wound this house 50 year, and I don't know it. All I know is what my own 2 eyes have seen, which is a good man walled up alive in 1 bad minute, and no one able to get at him, and the clock stopped all round him, like the house was holding its breath for him to come back, and he never did. And who, said Marian quietly, setting a fresh mainspring to a small carriage clock she had, without quite asking leave, begun to bring back to life at her own bench, do you think Haskett in 12 years? His Grace might ever come to trust so far as to tell? The old man looked at her a long while, at the plain, steady face, at the sure clever hands among the wheels. I've an old man's notion, madam, if you'll pardon it. Every soul that's come to that man in 12 years has come to pity him, and pity's a thing he can't abide, for it's cheap. But you're the first in 12 year to walk into this house and not flinch from him, and the first to touch his clocks, his and your father's both. Not with pity, but with knowing, like a body that means to mend a thing and not just mourn it. Don't you let him carry it alone, when he comes to tell you, whatever it is. He's been alone in it since he was a young man, and it's bent a straighter back than yours or mine would bear. Whatever stopped in him, it stopped the way a good clock stops, not broke, mind, stopped. There's all the difference. A broke clock you throw out, a stopped one only wants the right hand to find the fault and set it going. That's the whole of my trade, madam, and I begin to hope it's the whole of why you came. Marian did not force the stop thing. She had told him at the altar she would not pretend, and she could wait for a truth better than she could pry one loose. But she came to know the 2 forbidden places in the house. The first was the great tower clock over the front door, whose pale dial she had seen stopped from the drive, her husband had told her, the once she asked, in a voice gone suddenly flat, that she might do as she liked with every clock at Blackfell save that one. She was on no account to start the tower clock, nor go up to it, and he would tell her why one day, and until then he asked her to give him that, without his telling. And the second was a shut door in the east passage, locked, that misses. Pruitt's ring did not open, and when Marian once laid her hand on it, old Beale said, very gently, at her shoulder, not that room, if you please, your grace. That room is not opened. And she took her hand away, and did not ask, for she had begun to understand that the shut door and the stopped tower clock were the same wound seen twice, and that behind both was the minute at 2:20 the whole house had been holding its breath inside for 12 years. I will give you the tower clock and the shut door, and I will not ask, she told him one evening, for he had begun by then to come to dinner more often than not, taking the great chair with his marked cheek turned from the candles, and she had begun, without ever deciding to fill the long silence at that table with talk of the clocks and the house and then of books. For he had been a great reader once, and had let it lapse the way he had let lapse everything that gave him joy. I will give you both, and gladly, because you sent 20 miles for my father's clock, and wound it with your own hands before you knew whose it was. But I will tell you plainly, since we began honest, a stopped clock in a house is a grief that everyone tiptoes round and no one mends. And there is no clock so far gone that it is better stopped than going. When you are ready to tell me why the tower clock must stand, I will be under it, listening, and I would far rather have it from your own mouth, by daylight, than come on it myself in the dark, which, having married a woman who reads movements no one else can read, you should know I am uncommonly likely to do. He did not answer her then, but in the weeks after he let her thaw the house by degrees, because he could not, it seemed, quite bring himself to stop her. She started the small clocks first, the ones he did not much look at, a carriage clock in the breakfast room, a bracket clock on the stair, one at a time, watching his face each time. And each time he saw a clock going again that had stood stopped 12 years, something went over the grave-marked features that was half pain and half something that had almost forgotten its own name, and he said nothing, and let it run. And the house, clock by clock, began very softly to keep time again, and Marian, lying awake, would hear them, faint and few and brave in the dark, and think that a house is only a body, and a body that has stopped its own heart out of grief may yet, with patience, be taught to let it beat. It was the pocket watch she did not touch, because she understood it was not the house, but the man. He carried it always over his heart, and took it out sometimes without knowing he did it, in a silence, and looked at the stopped hands, and put it back. And Marian understood that the watch was the true wound, and the stopped house only the sign of it, that a man might one day let his hall keep time again, and still carry his own stopped minute next to his heart to the end of his life, if no one ever showed him he need not. She did not touch it. She waited. And one bright cold evening, working late at her bench over her father's great unfinished regulator, which she had carried up whole and begun, wheel by wheel, to complete, she straightened and found the Duke standing close behind her, having come up without her hearing, and he was looking not at the clock, but at her hands upon it, and there was on his face an expression she had not seen before, naked and unguarded. The look of a man watching someone do the one thing in the world he had thought could never be done again: go on, mend forward, make a stopped thing move. You are truly going to finish it, he said low, his last clock. You are going to make it keep time. I am, said Marian, not turning quite round, for she had learned that he told her the truest things when he was not being looked at. It was never broken, Your Grace. That is what people never understand about my father's clocks, and about a good many other things they give up on. It was only unfinished. There is all the difference in the world between a thing broken and a thing merely stopped, or waiting, or not yet done, the one you throw away, and the other only wants the right hand and enough patience and a little courage, and it will go. I have known that since I was 6 years old. It is nearly the only thing I know, but I have come to think it worth telling to people who have forgotten it, whatever their clocks are made of. And she felt, rather than saw, the marked right hand come up, slowly, as though unsure it was allowed, and it did not go to the watch over his heart for the first time in 12 years, but came to rest, bare and scarred and light, upon her shoulder, and the Duke of Blackfell said, in a voice she had not heard him use, Marian, only that. Her name, by itself, as the whole of the sentence and not the direction on the front of it, and she stood very still and did not turn round, and went on with her father's clock, so that he need never think she had stopped her work for pity. It was at the tail of that hard winter, near the anniversary of the fire, that the house's stopped minute came round again upon the man, and the whole of it broke open at last. Marian had marked, as the days shortened toward February's end, how her husband darkened, how he came less to dinner, and rode out longer alone in all weathers, and sat later in his study with the one candle, the stopped watch out on the desk before him. And old Haskett told her, lo, that it was always so at this time. Every year, the near fortnight round the night of the fire, when the man went down into the worst of it, and no one could follow. And into that raw, dark fortnight, unlooked for, on a night of driving sleet, came Crispin. He came the way ruin always came in that family, without warning and after dark, a battering at the great door near midnight, old Beale's shocked voice, and then her brother in the cold hall, sodden and wild-eyed and reeking of drink, having driven a hired gig up the moor in the storm and put it in the ditch a mile below and walked the rest, come to his rich new brother-in-law's door, because he had nowhere left to go. He had run through everything, he told them, half weeping, half laughing. In the appalling way he had, there were men after him now who did not trouble with the law. He must have money tonight, or be gone abroad by morning, and would Marian not speak to her Duke, for God's sake, after all he, and here even Crispin, who had never in his life finished that sentence honestly, ran out of it, for he could hardly say aloud, in that hall, after all I did to you. Marian got him to the kitchen fire and dry clothes and food, because he was her brother, and it was cold. But she did not wake her husband, and did not promise money, for she had learned long ago that money given to Crispin was only a longer fuse on the same charge. And it was while she was so occupied, near 2 a.m, that the thing happened no one had looked for Crispin, left alone a few minutes by the stable while a sleepy groom saw to the foundered horse. And being cold and drunk and careless as he had been the whole of his life, took a lantern into the loose box to look at the beast, and set it on a sill among the loose dry hay, and knocked it, and did not see, and a few minutes after, the cry went up that there was fire in the stable yard at Blackfell. Marian would carry the next quarter hour the rest of her life. She came out into the sleet to see the near end of the long stable range lit red from within, the dry old timber and the winter's hay taking with a roar. The horses screaming in their boxes, a terrified groom hauling at a bolt he could not free, and her brother nowhere, and then, worst of all, Crispin there, in the very mouth of the smoking box. Gone back in after the horse in one of the reckless, generous impulses that in him always came a fatal half-minute too late to be any use, and now down on his knees in the smoke, overcome, with the fire coming up the wall behind him. And she heard a door flung wide, and a man's feet on the cobbles, and turned to see her husband, the silent Duke, the man who had not gone near a fire in 12 years. Come across the yard at a headlong run in his shirt, bareheaded, the marked hand bare, straight into the smoke and the red light and the falling sparks, without 1/2 second's pause. What the county said afterward, when it came to say anything true about him at all, began with that quarter hour. For the men of the household and the 2 farms below, running up with the alarm, came in time to see the thing entire, to see the beast of Blackfell, the monster of 12 winters of firelit stories, go into a burning stable after a stranger and a beast, and come out of it not once but twice, the second time with the near roof beginning to go, and with Crispin, senseless, dragged out over the marked man's shoulder and put down in the wet yard alive, and then back a 3rd time, past the hands that tried to hold him, for the horse, which he brought out plunging and singed and living into the sleet, and no beast lost, and no man, and then down himself at last on the cobbles, choking and gray and shuddering, the old scarred hand cut fresh, having gone into the very thing that marked him 12 years before, to bring out the man who had ruined his wife. And the whole running, bucket-passing crowd fell, for a moment, into a silence quite unlike any Marian had yet met at Blackfell, the silence of 20 people watching the monster they had been raised on Lie Gray and gasping in the firelight. Having gone into a fire not one of them had dared, for people who were nothing to him, and understanding altogether that they had been telling the wrong story about this man for as long as most of them had been alive. She got him in, and would let no one else tend him, had him carried to her own warm room, and stripped of the smoking shirt, and washed and wrapped, and the cut hand cleaned by her own hands, the fresh hurt over all the old ones, and it was there, deep in the cold small hours, with his marked hand bandaged in her lap, and the one candle she would let burn, standing steady between them, that the Duke of Blackfell told his wife the truth, because a man who has just run into fire after the brother who ruined her cannot keep a locked door between himself and his own wife by so much as a silence. His voice when it came was flat and low, the voice of a man reading out a thing long engraved. "You have wondered about the tower clock," he said, "and the shut door in the east passage, and the lady the county says could not love my face. So I will tell you tonight, while I have not the strength left to be a coward about it, and then you may think of me what you must. The county says I got this face in a wildness of my own, that I was drunk, or mad, one February night 12 years ago, and set fire to my own father's muniment room in some jealous folly, and marked myself, and that Rosamond took one look at the ruin I had made, and could not love me after, and who could blame her? It is a lie from the first word to the last. I did not set that fire. Edmund did. He made himself go on. My brother, my young brother, that I loved better than my own life, that I love still, God help me, though he has not written me in 10 years. He was 22 that winter, and wild and in secret trouble, and that night he was in the muniment room after everyone slept, burning papers he did not want found, and fell asleep over the candle, and the papers took, and then the old dry presses, and then the room. And I woke to the smell of it, and went down, and found the passage full of smoke, and my brother not out, and I went in after him. I will not make more of it than it was I found him down, and got him up, and got him out, and the near window burst with the heat as we came past it, and cut me along the face and the hand, and a burning press came down and scorched the rest, and the servants got us both clear, and the house was saved, Edmund lived, and I was marked. And no one died, Marian. That is the one clean thing in the whole of it, and I have held to it 12 years. Not one soul was lost that night. It cost me a face and a hand, and it was the cheapest bargain I ever made, and I would make it again tonight." "And then," said Marian, very low, holding the bandaged hand, because she knew he was not near the worst of it yet. "And then I lied," he said. "That is the wound, Marian, not the face. The face healed inside the year. Edmund was 22 and a younger son, with nothing to live on but his name and his prospects, and a young man known to have burned down half his father's house in a drunken night, with worse behind it if it were looked into, is a young man finished, no living, no marriage, cut by everyone, gone. And I was the heir. I should be duke whatever befell. A scandal could not touch my bread, only my name, and I did not then know that a man's name is very nearly the whole of him. So when they asked how it began, I said it had been mine. My candle, my carelessness, my folly. I took the whole of it, and made Edmund swear to hold his tongue, and sent him away clean. And he married a good woman on the strength of the unspoilt name I had bought him, and prospered, and has not set foot in this house in 10 years, nor answered above 3 of my letters, because I have had a long time to understand it. A man cannot bear the sight of the brother he let pay for him. And Rosamond, when she saw the scar, and heard I was the reckless fool who had made it, found she could not love me after all, and went, and I let her go, and became, in the eye of the whole county, the brute who burned his own house and marked his own face and was rightly left alone with it. I became the monster. It was the only honest thing left me. Once I had made myself a liar to save my brother, it seemed a kind of truth to be, in the world's account, the low thing I had claimed to be. He turned the marked side of his face full to the candle then, and to her, and said the last of it. But that is not the whole wound, and I will give you the whole, since you did not flinch from the rest. It is not that Edmund let me take the blame, nor that he never came back, nor that Rosamond went. It is what it taught me, that I have never once been able to unlearn, that I spent the whole of myself in a single night, when I was 23, and that there was nothing of me left over after, nothing anyone would stay for, that a man who has given his all in 1 hour is a man to be used and then left, as my brother used me and left me, as the most beautiful woman in the county looked at me and left me. And so I stopped the clocks. Not for any death. The whole county has that wrong. No one died. I stopped them, because I could not bear to watch time carry the whole world's life forward, Edmund's wedding, and Rosamund's marriage, and the seasons and the years, all going on, while my own had stopped in 1 minute and would never move again. So I made the house stop with me. I had every clock halted at 24 past 2, the minute I woke to the smoke, and kept the whole house standing in that minute 12 years, because it was the last minute I was whole. That is what you married to save your brother, a man who stopped time because he could not survive the going on of it, and carries the last of that minute on his own body. And here, for the first time, he took the small gold watch from the breast of his shirt, and held it out on his scarred palm between them, its hands at 24 past 2, next to his heart. So that wherever I go it is always that minute, and it will never be any later, and nothing can ever be taken from me again, because I have already lost the whole of it. The door in the east passage is that room. I have kept it as the fire left it. You may know the whole of me now. The settlement holds. Whatever you think of it, you owe me nothing. You came to save your family and to finish your father's clock, and the rest was never in the bargain. The candle burned steady between them, the one flame she would let stand in that house of screened fires. And Marian Sterne sat with her husband's cut and bandaged hand in her lap and the stopped watch on his open palm between them, and found that the low lifelong certainty she had been raised inside, that she was the plain one, the useful one, worth exactly the work she did and no notice more, had gone strangely quiet in her, as though a hand had come down at last on a struck string, and she took the little stopped watch up out of his palm, very gently, and closed her own hand round it, warm, and did not give it back. I am going to tell you what you owe me, Gabriel, and what you do not, since we are being exact, she said. And her voice did not rise. It had not risen once in the whole of this, and she did not mean to begin now. You do not owe me a marriage of pity, and I will not take one. There is no pity in me for you and never was, only a great and growing respect, which is a far more dangerous thing. Your face was only a face by the second morning, my dear. I cannot tell you a comfortable lie, and I will not begin with that one. But the wound you think has ruined you past any woman's staying, the belief that you spent the whole of yourself in 1 night, and there is nothing left over that anyone would stay for, that is the one untrue thing in this room, and it is a mislabelled thing, and I am the one person bred from the cradle to spot a mislabelled thing and set it right. She lifted the stopped watch a little, in her closed warm hand. You were not spent in 1 night. You were stopped. There is all the difference in the world, and it is the whole of my trade. A stopped clock is not a broken one. It has every wheel and spring and patient hours still in it, waiting. It wants only the right hand to find the caught tooth and the courage to be started. And it will keep as true a time as ever, and better for having rested. Edmund did not leave because there was nothing left of you. He left because he could not look at what his cowardice had cost, which was a smallness in him and never once in you. Rosamund went because her heart was too small to do the plain brave thing your whole life has been made of. You have worn their smallness 12 years, as though it were your own deformity, and it is not yours, and I am taking it off you tonight, the way I would draw a false label off a good clock. And I am going to wind this watch, not tonight, while your hand is bleeding, but I am going to wind it, and start the tower clock, and set the whole of Blackfell keeping time again, because you were wrong. My dear, the going on of time is not the thing that takes everything away. It is the thing that brings the next hour, and the next, and I mean to be in every one of them, and there is no clause in it and no term, and it is full and final, and it cannot be reopened. Now be still, and let me see to your hand. I will not have my husband's hand lost to me. In the same winter I have only just found out I had a husband. Everything after was different, and nothing changed on the face of it, which is the way of the deepest changes. They did not carry the truth of the fire to the county. There was much that was quiet, and their own to keep. And Marian came without hesitation to the thing her husband had known alone 12 years, that some truths are best carried and not cried. But the marriage was no longer a bargain on either side, and both knew it. Crispin got quietly away south within the week, with just enough money to remove him and not a shilling more. Carried off the knowledge that his sister's monstrous husband had gone into fire to save his worthless life, and whether it worked any lasting good in him only the years would tell. But it was the first true thing that had ever happened to her brother, and she let it. And if the tale of the beast of Blackfell did not die all at once, such tales never do. It began, from that night outward, quietly to rot at the root, the way the oldest and best-loved lie will, once one true thing has been let stand up beside it in the light. She wound the watch on a still evening a fortnight after, when his hand was healed, took it from over his heart with his leave, and set it, and wound it, and gave it back to him going. 24 past 2, slipping into the ordinary onward hours of an ordinary evening, and he held it in his scarred palm and watched it go and could not speak, and she did not make him. And a little after that, on a clear cold morning with the whole valley white below, she took old Haskett and his worn winding keys up the tower stair at last, with her husband's blessing given at the foot of it, though he could not yet come up himself, and she found the great turret movement sound under its 12 years' dust, wanting only cleaning and oil, and the right hand and the courage. And she set it, and wound it, and let the pendulum go, and the great tower clock of Blackfell, that the whole county swore would never strike again, began to keep time, and when it came round to the hour, it struck. 12 slow bronze strokes rolling out over the white moor and down the long valley, the voice a whole generation in the valley below had never once heard, the voice their grandfathers had set their lives by, and in every farm and cottage people came out into their doorways in the cold, and looked up at the far grey house on the fell, and heard the silent clock striking, and did not yet know what it meant, but felt the strange turning over of the heart that means an old thing is ending, and something beginning that no one has words for yet. And then, at the very end of the following autumn, near a 12-month wed, her family came back for the last time, in the person of Crispin, whom the year abroad and the fright of the fire had taught less than she had hoped. For he came up the long moor road in a hired chaise on a raw, bright November afternoon, better dressed than he had any right to be, and with him, which Marian had not looked for, a narrow, smiling attorney named Mr. Loach, with a leather portfolio on his knee. Crispin came into the great hall with the assurance of a man who has decided that a duke for a brother-in-law is a property he has not yet been permitted to enjoy the full income of, embraced his sister with a warmth that had never once been there when she kept his books, priced the hall furniture with a sweep of his eye, and settled himself by the fire as one come home at last to his due. Marian received them with unimpeachable tea, under the great regulator that was her father's, whose slow sound now filled the hall, and she waited, because she had learned long ago that the one who waits is the one who wins, and that a Crispin with a want in him will always, given rope enough, come at last to the naming of it. Her husband stood by the hearth, silent at her asking. She had told him the night before what she meant to do, and he had argued, and she had heard him out, and then said, "No, my dear. You have spent 12 years being the one who takes the blame and carries the lie, so that no one else need be troubled by the truth of themselves. It is my turn now, and it is my brother, and if there is one thing a plain woman who reads was seasoned for, It is the quiet undoing of people who believe her too dull to be watching. Stand by the fire, and be silent, and let me show you what your own gentleness has been for." And he bowed his dark head, and obeyed her. Mr. Loach opened, as such men open, with a full half-hour of smiling regret, the sad narrowness of Mr. Sterne's present circumstances, the singular liberality of the Duke's connection, of which the family had understood they were to partake, and had not the natural expectation of a devoted brother that a sister so wonderfully advanced would wish to see her own flesh made comfortable, and, more delicately, the great regret it would be if the peculiar circumstances of so singular a marriage, a ruined girl given in a month to a gentleman of such ugly reputation to cover a debt, were ever to become a subject of common talk, or if the old stories of Blackfell were ever, by an aggrieved family, to be freshly and loudly told. "Name the figure, Mr. Loach," said Marian pleasantly. "You have been half an hour not naming it, and the tea is going cold, and my husband, who is silent by that fire out of courtesy to my wish, and not from any want of things he might say, has a hand that pains him when he sits too long in a cold room, so I would take it kindly if you would come to the sum." Mr. Loach put off his stroke, named the figure, a handsome annuity to Mr. Crispin Sterne, secured upon Blackfell, the discharge of certain fresh obligations, a suitable acknowledgment of a brother's natural feelings. "His natural feelings," said Marian. "Yes, thank you, Mr. Loach. That is admirably clear, and I will now be equally clear, and then there shall be an end, and you shall both be in the chaise before the good horses take a chill." She set down her cup. She did not raise her voice. She had not raised it once in the whole of this history. "Your case, Crispin, stripped of the gentleman's flowers, is this, that my marriage was a forced one, and might be made to sound uglier than it was. That my husband is a man the county tells wicked stories of, and that he will pay a great deal, and go on paying, rather than have his wife's brother carry those stories through every drawing-room in the north. That is the whole of the true offer, under Mr. Loach's regrets. Have I the shape of it? Her brother had the grace at least to color. You put it very coarsely, Marian, after all I have. I put it exactly, Crispin, which you have always mistaken for coarseness, because you have never once had to look plainly at what you were doing while you did it. That was always my share of the work. Now attend, for I am going to save us a very tedious afternoon. Mr. Sowerby, the Duke's dry solicitor, who had been sitting unregarded in the window with a locked box at his feet, for Marian had written to him the day her brother's letter came, and he had come north with the box the day before the chaise, rose, and inclined his head. "The first documents, if you please." Mr. Sowerby laid them out, dry as a law-calf's binding. Her Grace's settlement, executed a 12 months since, which Mr. Sterne will recall he did not trouble to read, being at the time much occupied. 3 provisions, all required by her Grace herself before she would sign. The first discharged the whole of the former Sterne debt, and took from Mr. Sterne, at the same hour, a full and formal release under his own hand, that no further claim of any kind shall ever lie against his Grace or her Grace by reason of that debt or that marriage. There is nothing owing here, and nothing to reopen. The second settled Miss Emmeline Sterne's portion, and Mrs. Sterne's income to their sole and separate use, beyond the reach, the words are here, and exact, of any creditor of Mr. Crispin Sterne, living or to come, so there is no family purse to be enlarged, the family being already provided for past Mr. Sterne's touching. And the third, at her Grace's particular instance, assigned to her Grace herself the whole of Mr. Sterne's own outstanding notes then known, bought in quietly this 12-month by his Grace's agents, as they came to light, against precisely such an afternoon as this. In plain speech, Mr. Sterne, there is no annuity to be had, and no scandal worth the buying off. Because her grace holds, at this moment, in that box, the whole of your paper, every note you have signed and not paid these 2 years, and could, if she chose, call in tomorrow enough to see you in a debtor's gaol for the rest of your natural life. Her grace saw to it a 12-month ago, while you told her she need not read it. The great hall was very quiet, but for the slow sound of the father's clock. Mr. Loach read the 3 provisions, and his smile did not so much fall as quietly cease to be renewed. Crispin looked from the papers to his plain sister with the beginning of real fear. And then he did the thing Marian had known he would do. He reached for the talk. "You would not," he said. "You could not use those against your own brother. Marian, you never could. You were always soft under all your... There is more than paper in this world. There is what a family may say, out of pure grief at being so used, about a marriage no honest woman would have made. And a man with a face like, ah, there it is. The talk." Marian rose, unhurried, crossed to the locked box, and took from it a small flat packet, tied and sealed, some 20 pages thick. "I wondered when we should come to the talk, Crispin, for it is the only coin left in your purse now the debt is spent. You mean you will carry the ugly stories of Blackfell through the county until my husband pays you to be quiet. So let me show you the last document, and then we shall have done." She came back and set the sealed packet on the tea-table between herself and her brother, and rested her hand flat upon it, and did not open it. "I will not read these to you," she said, very gently. "I will only tell you what they are, and let you decide how much appetite you have for carrying ugly stories into open daylight. These are sworn copies of the accounts you kept for our father in his last 2 years, that I have kept quiet ever since for our mother's sake and Emmeline's, and not for yours. They show in your own hand, whose forged signature raised the money that ruined us, and whose the money was that you took, our mother's little jointure that was to keep her, and the whole of Emmeline's portion, that our father set by with his own hands for her wedding, and that you spent and covered with a forged receipt, and let me believe lost in the general wreck. It is forgery, Crispin, and the theft of a mother's keep and a sister's portion, and it is not I who would be shamed if it were known. It is you, and only you, and it is a matter the law does not treat gently. My husband would keep these sealed to his grave, for it is his whole nature to take a wrong upon himself and shield the one who did it, and he would do it for you tonight if I let him, and be the poorer for it as he has always been. But I am not so good as my husband, and I have learned this year exactly what his kind of goodness costs, and who it truly serves. So I will make you the offer he never would. The moment one word of my marriage, or my husband, or this house is carried by you into any drawing-room or newspaper in England, this packet ceases to be sealed, and goes to Mr. Sowerby, and the county that has whispered 12 years about the beast of Blackfell learns instead the true history of the golden Sterne boy who forged his mother's name and robbed his sister's wedding, and every door in the north shuts to you forever. Or you go home this afternoon, and you are quiet, and you leave this family in peace, and the packet stays sealed, and every name in this room, your own included, stays as whole as it is this minute, which is a mercy you have done nothing to earn, and are getting only because I would rather finish my husband's kind of goodness on my own terms than watch it go on eating him alive. You have until the tea is cold to choose, and I find I no longer greatly mind which you decide, which is the freest I have felt in the whole of my life." Crispin Sterne looked at his plain sister across the tea-table, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in the 25 years he had spent being adored past her, and what looked steadily back at him was not for sale, had never been for sale, had in fact a year before, while he pronounced her too dull to read a settlement. been quietly reading the whole of the future and closing every door in it against exactly this afternoon. He looked at the sealed packet under her steady hand. He looked, last and longest, at the tall, scarred, silent man by the hearth who had gone into fire to save his worthless life. And something moved in the handsome, dissolute features, some old buried thing, which was, for one unguarded moment. "Shame come, Mr. Loach," he said, rising too quickly, not meeting anyone's eye. "Put away your portfolio. There is nothing here for us. Nothing at all." And the two of them went out through the cold hall and down the great steps to the chaise. Without the annuity and without 1 shilling of the ducal gold, they had come 100 miles to squeeze, and the whole grasping business ended, as Marian had meant it to, not in a scandal but in a silence, the sealed packet going back into the box unopened, into the dark, where it would stay. It was only at the door, while Mr. Loach got the defeated portfolio into the chaise, that her brother turned back once, the golden one, the darling, the hope of the house. Looking now at the plain sister he had traded to a monster to cover his own crime, standing Duchess of Blackfell in the door of the great house, with the scarred master of it at her shoulder, as no one had ever once stood at Crispin's own, and said, "Lo," and for the only time in his life, wholly without performance, "You always did keep the books, Marian. You always did see what the rest of us couldn't be troubled to. We thought it a dullness in you." His eyes went once round the warm hall, the man, the marriage, the great clock-keeping time. "It was never that you had no eye for anything better, was it?" "No," said Marian, not unkindly. "It was never that. Go home, Crispin, and be as well as you can, and be quiet, and you will keep your name, which is a great deal more than you came here meaning to leave me with." And the chaise rolled, and the long moor road took it, and was gone, and only then, in the whole of that long grey afternoon, did the Duke of Blackfell speak, from the doorway of his own house, in the low, rough carrying voice that had once cried orders across a burning yard, stern. Her brother's face appeared once more at the chaise window. "You ruined her to cover yourself, and gave her to a man you believed a monster, and she has spent this afternoon saving your neck from the rope your own hand knotted, which is a mercy I could not have found in myself. So I will say, the thanks she is too clear-eyed to say, and you are too small to understand. Thank you, Mr. Sterne, for the one wholly good thing you ever did, which you did by accident, to save your own skin. You sent me my wife. Now go down my road, and do not come up it again. Good day." And the chaise went, and Marian stood in the door of Blackfell, in the raw bright light, and felt her husband come to stand at her shoulder, his bare scarred hand coming to rest, unhidden, over hers on the cold stone of the balustrade, and found that what she felt, watching her brother go, was neither triumph nor grief, but the plain, clean sensation of a long, hard sum at last, worked through, and proved and ruled off, and under it, rising, quiet and enormous, the whole warm rest of her life. She wrote to Edmund that winter, without asking, because her husband would go to his grave never asking, having taught himself to want nothing. And she thought it high time somebody wanted something on his behalf. She did not reproach the man. It was not her quarrel. She only wrote him who she was, and that she knew the whole true history of the fire from Gabriel's own mouth, and would keep it as close as Gabriel had, and that his brother was not the monster the county thought, but only a good man too long alone, who had never once in 12 years spoken a word against him, and that the road up the moor was open, if ever he found he could travel it. She did not tell Gabriel she had written, and she did not know, for a long time, whether it had done any good, only that, at the turning of the next year, a letter came in a hand the Duke had not seen in a decade, and he took it away to read alone, and came back with his marked face washed and quiet and changed, and all he said was, "Edmund is coming in the spring. He is bringing his wife. He wishes, and could not finish it, and did not need to." They opened the shut room that spring, the burned muniment room that had stood 12 years exactly as the fire left it. Marian had it cleared, the charred presses carried out, the scorched paneling stripped, the black ruin taken away, and where it had been she made a workroom bright and clean, with long benches and good north light, and moved her father's tools into it, and his great regulator, finished now and keeping perfect time, so that the very room where the fire began, and the lie was born, and the clocks were stopped, became the room where they were mended and made and set going, and where Marian Sterne, whom the world would never let be a clockmaker, was in her own house, exactly and entirely a clockmaker, for the rest of her contented life. And Edmund came in the spring, gray and nervous, and the two brothers walked out a long way over the moor, and came back late and did not say what had passed. But the Duke gave his brother a small going clock of Marian's own making to carry home, to keep the same true time as the tower at Blackfell, so that whatever else the years had cost, they should at least be under 1 hour again, and it was the nearest either of them came, in words, to the thing mended between them, and it was enough. He wore the watch going after that. He had carried it stopped 12 years over his heart, the last of his frozen minute, and now it kept true time against his breast, wound each night by his hand or hers, so that a man who had once stopped time, that nothing might be taken from him again, learned instead to carry time with him, hour after hour, into a life that had at last more to bring him than to take. A man can carry his own worst minute lightly, it turns out, once he has learned it is only one of the hours, and that there are a great many more coming, and that someone he trusts is keeping the count. The county came round, as the county always comes round, a good 10 years behind its own carriers and market women. The stories of the beast of Blackfell wore thin and then wore out, the way even the oldest lie will once a true thing has been let stand beside it long enough, and the tale that got told in the valley instead was of the great house on the fell, where the clocks had all stopped for a sorrow no one rightly remembered, until a plain, quiet duchess, who was secretly the finest clockmaker in the north, came up the moor and started them one by one, and mended the master along with his clocks. Her clocks went down into the valley by 2s and 3s, until half the cottage kitchens in the parish kept the true Blackfell time on the shelf, and the sealed packet of her brother's forgery stayed in its dark box to the end of both their lives, unopened, and no one in the north ever learned what it had cost the Duchess of Blackfell to keep it sealed. The county had said that at Blackfell the clocks had stopped for good, and now, on the hour, every hour, the whole valley heard them keeping time. The great regulator her father made stood in her workroom to the end of her days, keeping truer time than anything in England, exactly as old Josiah Sterne had meant it to, and not lived to see, and beside it on the bench lay the small worn folding glass she had reached up into the movement with on the 4th cold morning of her marriage, when she found her father's name at the stopped heart of a monster's house, and understood that she had come not, after all, to the coldest bargain of her life, but to the beginning of the only warm thing in it. And there was not a soul in that once silent house who did not come at last to hold what the county itself came round to holding, a decade too late as always, that the plain Sterne girl they married off in a month to be rid of the reckoning had made the great marriage of her generation, and that it was she, stooping as she always had over the stopped and the mislabelled and the given-up-on thing, who had walked in past every warning she was raised on, through the door of the one house in England where a man had stopped time itself rather than watch it carry away everything he loved, and had found the caught tooth, and set it right, and started him going again into the ordinary blessed onward hours. The county had said that at Blackfell the clocks had stopped for good, and now, on the hour, every hour, for the whole valley, and for all the years that came after, the clocks of Blackfell kept time, and did not stop. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you are watching from and what this story made you feel. And if it moved you, consider subscribing softly so you won't miss the next one.